Hey, and welcome to Unpacking the Past with Sophie. I'm your host, Sophie, and in today's video is about a serial killer named co-ed killer. So if you're uncomfortable with the following mentioning, then I recommend that you click off the video and watch something else. But if you're somewhat comfortable with the following mentioning, then grab a bag of popcorn or any other snack, sit back and relax and listen to me about a serial killer. Heads up or warning, because this story is quite gruesome. There will be mentioning of necrophilia, abuse, and unaliving of animals. So Edmund Kemper III was born in Burbank, California on the 18th of December 1948. He was the middle child of 3 children and was the only son born to Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper, a native of Montana, and his father, Edmund Emil Kemper Jr. His father was a World War II veteran who after the war tested nuclear weapons at the Pacific Proving Grounds before returning to California, where he worked as an electrician. In Edmund's youth, he performed rites with his younger sister dolls that culminated in him removing the heads and hands. On one occasion, when his older sister Susan teased him and asked why he didn't try to kiss his teacher, to which he replied, quote, "If I kiss her, I have to kill her first," unquote. Edmund recalled that as a young boy, he would sneak out of his house armed with his father's bayonet and go to his second grade teacher's house to watch her through the windows. It sounds both creepy and a bit weird at the same time. Like, literally just him standing there watching his second grade teacher's house with a bayonet, just like looking through the windows. That's fucked up. Edmund stated in later interviews that some of his favorite games to play as a child were gas chambers and electric chair, in which he asked his younger sister to tie him up and flip an imaginary switch. He would then tumble over and write on the floor, pretending that he was being executed by gas inhalation or electric shock. In later accounts, he also noted that he was molested by his cousin and older sister, and that he was physically abused by both of his parents. But by his own account, Edmund came close to death several times as a child. Once his sister tried to push him in front of a train, while another time where she pushed him into the deep end of a swimming pool where Edmund almost drowned. Edmund had a close relationship with his father and was notably devastated when his parents separated in 1957 and got a divorce in 1961. His parents, Colonel and Edmund Jr., had an acrimonious relationship, meaning that their relationship was either intense or bitter. Edmund's mother often complained about her husband's manual electrician job. His father later stated that, quote, "Suicide missions in wartime and atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with Clarnell," unquote, and stated that she affected him, quote, "more than 396 days and nights of fighting on the front," end quote. After his parents' divorce, Edmund lived with his mother, Colonel, in Helena, Montana. Edmund had a severely dysfunctional relationship with his mother, an erratic, domineering alcoholic who he claims frequently belittled, humiliated, and abused him. Edmund exhibited antisocial behavior such as a cruelty to animals. At the age of 10, he buried a family cat alive, then dug its body up and beheaded it and mounted its head on a spike, which led Edmund's mother to force Edmund to live down in her basement, away from his sister, whom she feared he might harm in some way. She stated that he was a real weirdo in a phone conversation to Edmund's father, unaware that her son had been eavesdropping. She would often smack him for the slightest act of importunation. Damn. Edmund did not have a normal nor a good childhood, like at all. Edmund later stated that he derived pleasure from successfully lying to his family about killing the cat. At the age of 13, he killed another family cat, which he thought favored his younger sister over him. He kept pieces of its body in his closet. Okay, that's pretty fucked up. Sorry, my language. Like, he is really crazy. I mean, burying the cat alive at the age of 10. That's quite worrisome, and also that's messed up. Really, it really is messed up. God damn. Edmund claims that his mother refused to show him any affection out of fear that she will turn him gay. Edmund also claims that she told young Edmund that he reminded her of his father. Edmund claims that his mother refused to show him any affection out of fear that she would turn him gay. Edmund also claims that she told young Edmund that he reminded her of his father, and that no woman would ever love him. Though Edmund also complained that his mother was always trying to get him to go out with girls, he later described her as big, ugly, and awkward, and as sick, angry woman, while others have postulated that she had borderline personality, or BPD in short. At the age of 14, Edmund ran away from home to his father in Van Nuys, LA. Once he got there, Edmund learned that his father had remarried and now had a stepson. Edmund stated that his father, quote, cared more for his second family than he did for us, unquote. In different settings, either Edmund's father or his mother shipped him off to live with his paternal grandparents, who lived on a ranch in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada on Road 224, about 2 miles west of the town of North Fork. Edmund described his parents as senile and said that his mother emasculated him. So Edmund hated living on his grandparents' farm. Before going to North Fork, he had already begun learning about firearms when his grandparents took away his rifle after he had killed several birds and other small animals. On August 27, 1964, at the age of 15, Edmund finally turned his building rage on his grandparents. Edmund and his grandma had an argument in the kitchen. After the argument, Edmund shot his grandmother, Maud Matilda, with a rifle, shooting her once in the head and twice in the back, then stabbing her several times. When Edmund's grandfather returned home, Edmund went outside and shot him by his car, then hid the body. Afterward, Edmund called his mother, who told him to call the police and tell them what happened. Later, Edmund will say that he shot his grandmother to, quote, see what it felt like, unquote. He added that he had killed his grandfather so that he wouldn't have to find out that his wife had been murdered. Edmund did that and waited for the police to arrive. He later said that he killed his grandfather because he would be angry with him. Edmund's crimes were deemed incomprehensible for a 15-year-old to commit, and court psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He was then sent to Itascadero, definitely butchered that, state hospital, a maximum security facility in St. Louis Obispo County that houses mentally ill convicts. At Itascadero, the California Youth Authority's psychiatrists and social workers disagreed with the court psychiatrist's diagnosis. Their report stated that Edmund showed, quote, no flight of ideas, no interference with thought, no expression of delusions or hallucinations, and no evidence of bizarre thinking, unquote. They also observed him to be intelligent and introspective. Initial testing measured his IQ at 136, more than 2 standard deviations above average. Edmund was re-diagnosed with a less severe condition, a, quote, personality trait disturbance, passive-aggressive type, unquote. Later during his stay at Tascadero, he was given another IQ test, which produced a higher result of 145. Edmund endeared himself to his psychiatrist by being a model prisoner. He was trained to administer psychiatric tests to other inmates. The psychiatrist later said, quote, he was a good worker, and this is not typical of a sociopath. He really took pride in his work, end quote. Edmund also became a member of the JCs while in Atascadero and claimed to have developed, quote, some new tests and some new skills on Minnesota multifaceted personality inventory, end quote, specifically an overt hostility scale, doing his work with the Atascadero psychiatrist. After the second arrest, Edmund said that being able to understand how these tests functioned allowed him to manipulate his psychiatrist, admitting that he learned a lot from the sex offenders to whom he administered the test. On December 18th, 1969, on his 21st birthday, Edmund was released on parole from Atascadero, but his release was against the recommendation of psychiatrists at the hospital that he shouldn't get released and live with his mother. Because of her past abuse and his psychological issues involving her, he rejoined her in Santa Cruz, California, where she had moved after ending her third marriage to take a job with the University of California. While Edmund was there, he attended community college for a time and worked a variety of jobs, where he eventually found employment of the Department of Transportation in 1971. He had applied to become a state trooper, but he was rejected because of his size. He weighed around 300 pounds and was 6'9", which led to his nickname, Big Ed. However, he did hang around some of the cruise police officers. One gave him a training school badge and handcuffs, while another let him borrow a gun, according to Whoever Fights Monsters by Robert K. Riesler and Tom Schotman. I think that's how you pronounce his name, or their names. Edmund even had a car that resembled a police cruiser. Edmund worked a series of menial jobs before getting employment with the State of California Division of Highways in 1971. During this time, his relationship with Clarnell remained toxic and hostile, the two of them having frequent arguments that their neighbors often overheard. Edmund later described the arguments he had with his mother around this time, stating the following, that, quote, "My mother and I stayed right in on horrendous battles, just horrible battles, violent and vicious. I've never been in such a vicious verbal battle with anyone. It would go to fist with a man, but this was my mother, and I couldn't stand the thought of my mother and I doing these things. She insisted on it, and just over stupid things. I remember one roof raiser was over whether I should have my teeth cleaned." End quote. When he had saved enough money, Edmund moved out to live with a friend in Alameda. There he still complained of being unable to get away from his mother because he regularly called him, would even pay him surprise visits. He often had financial difficulties, which resulted in him frequently returning to his mother's apartment in Aptos. Edmund, who was then in his early 20s, met a female student from Turlock High School at a Santa Cruz beach, and the two became engaged in March 1973. The engagement only lasted over a year before being broken off due to Edmund's second arrest. Her parents requested her name not to be revealed to the public since she was reported to be 17 and still attending high school at the time. That same year, he began working for the highway department. Edmund was hit by a car while out on his motorcycle. His arm was badly injured, and he received $15,000 as a settlement in the civil suit he filed against the car's driver. He ended up being unable to work. He then turned his mind toward other pursuits. He noticed a larger number of young women hitchhiking in the area. In his new car he bought with some of his settlement money, he began storing the tools he thought he might need to fulfill his murderous desires, which include a gun, a knife, and handcuffs. So between May 1972 and February 1973, Edmund had killed 5 female students and 1 female high school student. On May 7, 1972, Edmund was driving in Berkeley, where he picked up 2 18-year-old hitchhiking students from Fresno State University, Mary Ann Peske and Anita Mary Tressa, who were trying to visit their friends at Stanford University. After driving for an hour, Edmund managed to reach a secluded wooded area near Alameda, with which he was familiar from his work at the highway department, without alerting his passengers that he had changed direction from where they wanted to go. It was there that he handcuffed Mary Ann and locked Anita in the trunk. Then he would go on to stab Mary Ann, and strangle her to death, while subsequently killing Anita in a similar manner. Edmund later confessed that while handcuffing Mary Ann, he, quote, brushed back of his hand against one of her breasts and it embarrassed him, end quote, adding that he said, quote, "Whoops, I'm sorry, or something like that, after grazing her chest, despite murdering her minutes later. He also noted that he chose the women because they seemed upper middle class, of a better class of people than the scrounchy, messy, dirty, smelly, hippie types I wasn't at all interested in. End quote. Edmund put both of the women's bodies in the trunk of his car and returned to his apartment. He was stopped on the way by a police officer for having a broken taillight, but the officer didn't detect the corpses in the car. Edmund's roommate was not at home, so he took the bodies into his apartment, where he photographed and had necrophilia with the naked corpses before dismembering them. He then put the body parts into plastic bags, which he later abandoned near Loma Prieta Mountain. Before disposing of Mary Ann's and Anita's severed heads in a ravine, Edward engaged in oral intercourse with both of them. In August of that year, Mary Ann's skull was found on Loma Prieta Mountain. An extensive search failed to turn up the rest of Mary Ann's remains or trace of Anita. On the evening of September 14, 1972, Edmund picked up a 15-year-old Korean dance student named Aiko Ko, who had decided to hitchhike to a dance class after missing her bus. Edmund again drove to a remote area where he pulled a gun on Aiko before accidentally locking himself out of his car. However, Aiko let him back inside, despite the fact that the gun was still in the car. Back inside the car, he proceeded to choke her unconscious, raped her, and killed her. Edmund subsequently packed Aiko's body into the trunk of his car and went to a nearby bar to have a few drinks, then returned to his apartment. He later confessed that after exiting the bar, he opened the trunk of his car, quote, admiring his catch like a fisherman, end quote. Back at Edmund's apartment, he had sexual intercourse with the corpse, then dismembered and disposed of the remains in a similar manner as his previous two victims. Aiko's mother called the police to report the disappearance of her daughter and put up hundreds of flyers asking for information, but she didn't receive any responses regarding her daughter's location or status. So on January 7, 1973, Edmund had moved back in with his mother and was driving around the Cabrillo College campus, where he picked up 18-year-old students Cynthia and Cindy Shell. He drove to a wooded area and fatally shot her with a .22 caliber pistol. He then placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove to his mother's house, where he kept the body hidden in a closet in his room overnight. When his mother left for work the next morning, he had sexual intercourse with Cindy's corpse and removed the bullet from it, then dismembered and decapitated her in his mother's bathroom. Edmund kept Cindy's severed head for several days, regularly engaging in eromatio with it, then buried it in his mother's garden facing up toward her bedroom. After his arrest, he stated that he did this because his mother, quote, always wanted people to look up at her, end quote. He discarded the rest of Shell's remains by throwing them off a cliff, and over the course of the following few weeks, all except Cindy's head and right hand were discovered. A pathologist determined that Cindy had been cut into pieces with a power saw. On February 5, 1973, after a heated argument with his mother, Edmund left his house in search of possible victims, which would heighten suspicion of a serial killer preying on hitchhikers in the Santa Cruz area. Students had been advised to accept rides only from cars with university stickers on them. Edmund was able to obtain a sticker as his mother worked at UC Santa Cruz. He separately encountered 23-year-old Rosalind Heather Thorpe and 20-year-old Alice Helen or Ellison Liu on the UCSU campus. So according to Edmund, he first encountered Rosalind as she exited a building having attended a lecture. Rosalind entered the front passenger seat believing Edmund to be a fellow student. They began chatting and amicably as he drove. Shortly thereafter, he observed Alice, whom he described as a small Chinese girl, and thumbing a ride. Edmund stopped his vehicle and Alice entered the back seat of his car. Shortly thereafter, Edmund slowed his car, then shot Rosalind right in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. He then turned toward Alice as she cowered in the back seat of his car. He missed the first two shots, but the third shot hit Alice right in the temple. Their bodies were then wrapped in blankets. Edmund again brought his victims back to his mother's house. This time he beheaded them in his car and carried the headless corpses into his mother's house to have sexual intercourse with them. He then dismembered the bodies, removed the police ran identification and discarded the remains the next morning. There were some remains found at Eden Canyon a week later, and more were found near Route 1 in March. When Edmund was questioned in an interview as to why he decapitated his victims, he explained, quote, "The head trip fantasies were a bit like a trophy. You know, the head is where everything is at. The brain, eyes, mouth, that's the person. I remember being told as a kid, you cut off the head and the body dies. The body is nothing after the head is cut off." Well, that's not quite true. There's a lot left in the girl's body without the head. On April 20, 1973, Edmund was awakened by his mother, Colonel Strandberg, coming home from a party. While sitting in her bed reading a book, she noticed Edmund enter her room and said to him, quote, "I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now," end quote. Edmund replied, "No, good night." He waited for her to fall asleep. Then he snuck back into her room to bludgeon her with a claw hammer and slit her throat with a penknife. Edmund then beheaded his own mother and, quote, "humiliated her corpse," end quote, as he stated in a 1984 interview. Edmund stated that he put her head on a shelf and screamed at it for an hour, threw darts at it, and ultimately, quote, "smashed her face in," end quote. He also cut out her tongue, lungs, and put them in the garbage disposal. However, the garbage disposal couldn't break down the tough vocal cord and rejected the tissue back into the sink. Quote, "That seemed appropriate as much as she bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years," end quote, Edmund later said. Edmund hid his mother's corpse in a closet and went to drink at a nearby bar. Upon his return, he invited his mother's best friend, 59-year-old Sarah Taylor Hallett, over to the house to have dinner and watch a movie. When Sarah arrived, Edmund strangled her. He subsequently put Sarah's corpse in a closet, secured any artwork of a disturbance, and left a note to the police. It read, quote, "Approximately 5:15 a.m. Saturday. No need for her to suffer anymore at the hands of this horrible, murderous butcher. It was quick, asleep, the way I wanted. Not sloppy and incomplete gent. Just a slack of time. I got things to do," end quote. Afterward, Edmund fled the scene. He drove non-stop to Pueblo, Colorado, taking caffeine pills to stay awake for the over 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers journey. Edmund had 3 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition in his car. He believed that he was the target of an active manhunt. After not hearing any news on radio about the murders of his mother and Sarah, when he arrived in Pueblo, he found a phone booth and called the police. Edmund confessed to the murders of his mother and Sarah, but the police didn't take his call seriously and told him to call back at a later time. Several hours later, Edmund called again, asking to speak to an officer he personally knew. He confessed to that officer of killing his mother and Sarah, then waited for the police to arrive and take him into custody. Upon his capture, Edmund also confessed to the murders of the 6 students. When asked in a later interview why he turned himself in, Edmund said, quote, "The original purpose was gone. It wasn't serving any physical or real or emotional purpose. It was a pure waste of time. Emotionally, I couldn't handle it much longer. Toward the end there, I started feeling the folly of the whole damn thing. At the point of near exhaustion, near collapse, I just said to hell with it and called it off." Edmund was indicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder on May 7, 1973. He was assigned the Chief Public Defender of Santa Cruz County Attorney Jim Jackson, but due to Edmund's explicit and detailed confession, his counsel's only option was to plead guilty. By reason of insanity to charge, Edmund then attempted suicide twice while in police custody. His trial went ahead on October 23, 1973. 3 court-appointed psychiatrists found Edmund to be legally sane. One of the psychiatrists, Dr. Joel Ford, investigated his juvenile records and the diagnosis that he was once psychotic. Dr. Joel also investigated Edmund, including under truth serum, and relied to the court that he had engaged in cannibalism, alleging that he sliced flesh from the legs in a casserole. But nevertheless, Dr. Joel determined that Edmund was fully cognizant in each case and stated that Edmund enjoyed the prospect of the infamy associated with being labeled a murderer. Edmund later recanted the confession of cannibalism. California used immunization standard, which held that for a defendant to, quote, establish a defense on the ground of insanity, it must be clearly proved that at the time of the committing of the act, the party accused was laboring under such a defect of reason, from disease of mind, and not to know the nature and quality of the act he was doing, or if he did know it, that he did not know he was doing what was wrong." End quote. Edmund appeared to have known that the nature of his acts was wrong, and that he had shown signs of malice aforethought. On November 1st, Edmund took the stand where he testified that he killed the victims because he wanted them, quote, "for myself like possession," end quote, and attempted to convince the jury that he was insane, based on reasoning that his action could have been committed only by someone with an aberrant mind. He stated that two beings inhabited his body, and that the killer personality took over as it was, quote, "kind of like blacking out," end quote. On November 8th, 1973, the six men and 6 women jury deliberated for 5 hours before declaring Edmund sane and guilty on all counts. He asked for the death penalty, requesting, quote, "death by torture," end quote. However, moratorium placed on capital punishment by the Supreme Court of California, he instead received 70 years to life for each count, with these terms to be served currently, and was sentenced to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. Just shortly after arriving in California Medical Facility in 1973, Edmund was admitted to a psychiatrist for re-evaluation. He was re-diagnosed with antisocial, narcissistic personality disorders. In the California Medical Facility, Edmund was incarcerated in the same prison block as other notorious criminals such as Herbert Mullen and Charles Manson. Edmund showed particular disdain for Mullen, who committed his murder at the same time and in the same area as Edmund did. Edmund described Mullen as quote, "just a cold-blooded killer, killing everybody he saw for no good reason," end quote. Edmund manipulated and physically intimidated Mullen, who at 5'9" or 175 was a foot shorter than he. Edmund stated that, quote, "Mullen had a habit of singing and bothering people when somebody tried to watch TV, so threw water on him to shut him up. Then when he was a good boy, I'd give him peanuts. Herbie liked peanuts. That was effective because pretty soon he asked permission to sing. That's called behavior modification treatment," end quote. Edmund remained among general population prison and was considered a model prisoner. He was in charge of scheduling other inmates' appointments with psychiatrists, and was an accomplished craftsman of ceramic cups. He was also a prolific narrator of audiobooks for a charity program that prepared material for the visually impaired. A 1987 Los Angeles Times article stated that he was the coordinator of prison programs. A 1987 Los Angeles Times article stated that he was the coordinator of prisons program and had personally spent over 5,000 hours narrating books with several hundred completed recordings to his name. Edmund was hired from these positions in 2015 after he experienced a stroke and was declared medically disabled. He received the first rules violation report in 2016 for failing to provide a urine sample. While in prison, Edmund has participated in a number of interviews, including a segment in the 1981 documentary The Killing of America, as well as an appearance in 1984 documentary Murder, No Apparent Motive. This interview had contributed to the understanding of the mind of serial killers. FBI profiler John E. Douglas described Edmund as, quote, "as among the brightest prison inmates he interviewed and capable of rare insight of a violent." He further added that he personally liked Edmund, referring to him as friendly, open, sensitive, and having a good sense of humor. However, Edmund's discussion with Robert Riesler changed how the FBI conducted interviews with serial killers. According to Ann Burgess, Edmund told Riesler at the end of one of the interviews, quote, "the guard isn't coming back. They're on change of shift. He's not going to be here for 30 minutes. In that time, I could snap your head and leave it on the table. I've known prison. I owned the prison. Then I killed an FBI agent," end quote. After the guard came back, Edmund said he was joking. Regardless, FBI agents were required to conduct interviews in pairs and could no longer do this alone. Edmund is forthcoming about the nature of his crimes and has stated that he participated in interviews to save others like himself from killing. At the end of his Murder, No Apparent Motive interview, he said, quote, "there's somebody out there that is watching this and hasn't done that, hasn't killed people, and wants to, and rages inside and struggles with that feeling, or is so sure they have it under control. They need to talk to somebody about it, trust somebody enough to sit down and talk about it, about something that isn't a crime. Thinking that way isn't a crime. Doing it isn't just a crime. It's a horrible thing. It doesn't know when to quit, and it can't be stopped easily and once it starts." He also conducted an interview with French writer Stefan Devon Bergwan in 1991. Edmund was just eligible for parole in 1979. He was denied parole that year, as well as at the parole hearings in 1980, 1981, and 1982. He subsequently waived his right to a hearing in 1985. He was denied parole at his 1988 hearing, where he said, "Society is not ready in any shape or form for me. I can't fault them for that." He was denied parole again in 1991 and 1994. He then waived his right to a hearing in 1997 and in 2002. He attended the next hearing in 2007, where he was once again denied parole. Prosecutor Adrian Simmons said, quote, "We don't care how much of a model prisoner he is because of a minority of his crimes," end quote. Edmund waived his right to a hearing again in 2012, where he was denied parole in 2017, and after declining to attend a parole hearing in 2024, Edmund was denied parole once again. His next eligible term is in 2031, but following his 2024 parole hearing, it was reported that Edmund used a wheelchair and suffered from diabetes and coronary heart disease. A psychiatric evaluation conducted in April 2024 classified him as a, quote, high risk to reoffend. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you have enjoyed. If you have, please like and subscribe, and please write in the comments what you thought was the most interesting, if you can call it that, about this whole murder case about Edmund. I will see you all in my next video.